So like and subscribe if you enjoy this sort of content, trying something different with the channel here as far as Pokemon content goes. Today we're going to be making a Pokemon Ubers team using an in-game for Sword and Shield because I want to. So this is just sort of, I'll go over the team making process that I went with for starters, and then just sort of explain a few things that makes the whole dynamic for building this team a bit different, and it's going to basically affect the approach that we're going to want to take on this team. So the first thing, as you can obviously see, we have Giratina Origin form as our defogger. Now, the reason why I have him here is because the big difference with Sword and Shield is a lot of Pokemon cannot learn the moves that they're able to learn on Showdown. This includes the move Defog. So a lot of your standard defoggers, such as Yveltal, Ho-Oh, and even the rare occasional Xerneas are no longer options. Those Pokemon can no longer learn Defog when you put them in Sword and Shield. We're sort of building this team based off of the assumption that either you're too cheap to get Pokemon Bank and spend the $3 on it, or you have no means of accessing Sun and Moon and getting the move tutor to get those moves into transfer, or maybe all the above. I don't know, to each their own. But we're sort of building this team with Sun and, or I'm sorry, not Sun. We're building this team with Sword and Shield and nothing else. So you basically boil it down to two options then in that case. Giratina Origin form or standard Giratina. And I chose Origin form so that way we don't end up with anything too passive on our team. Now, I have this particular EV spread. I mean, there's a few different spreads that you can go with. The reason why I have this spread with the 28 EVs and speed is it's explained on Smogon's page for Giratina Origin if you look at the Sun and Moon tab. 28 speed EVs basically allows us to outspeed Yveltal with Choice Scarf and Choice Scarf Xerneas. I know that those are both two very uncommon things that you'll see in the Ubers metagame. You may not even see them at all. I mean, Yveltal is almost guaranteed to not be running Choice Scarf in this current meta and day and age, simply because you need to use it as a specially defensive mon to deal with Shadow Rider, which we'll get into in a moment here. But at least this adds more options to the list of things that will outspeed with Choice Scarf after they've been paralyzed by T-Wave. So that's a thing. I mean, standard is you can run a special set. You could also run like a physical set with Claw, Shadow Sneak, but I personally prefer the special set. And to sum it all up, this is our defogger, and pretty much the best option that we have as a defogger. As for what set you want to run, I don't know what the best set is. Ubers is something that I really have very little experience. Next to none, really. So this brings us to our next one, Yveltal. This has almost just become a, dare I say, a mandatory Pokemon. Suddenly I can't talk tonight. Suddenly this is either like a really mandatory Pokemon just because of the very high level of presence in Shadow Rider, which is partially why we have one of our own. Calyrex has very quickly climbed the ranks to absolute supremacy, and we need something to have an answer for it so that we don't get 6-0'd by it. So Yveltal deals with it the best. Now, you may notice that Knockoff is missing from its moveset, and that's because in Sword and Shield, Yveltal does not get Knockoff. So this basically forces you to use your two Dark-type moves in Sucker Punch and Foul Play as your only options, which, I mean, they still work. But that's what you have to deal with. Roost and U-Turn, two good moves. And as I've said before, Yveltal does not get access to Defog in Sword and Shield. So that's just something that you have to live with if you're choosing to build a team through this. I went with Eternatus next. I mean, it's just overall a really good mon to use. It makes for a really good cornerstone Pokemon. It's just very well-rounded, has very few weaknesses, really great defensive typing, great recovery, status moves. which Giratina definitely appreciates a lot for Hex. This is just sort of your standard run-of-the-mill, timid, specially defensive Eternatus. Not really a whole lot to talk about at this point. And next I wanted something with some aggression as well. So I went with Shadow Rider, just because it's almost an omnipresent Ubermon at the moment. It's even more deadly when you Dynamax it. I mean, we're all kind of, for those who play Ubers, are still sort of assuming that eventually they're going to be banning Dynamaxing from Ubers, but that has yet to be seen, and maybe they may not in the end. I don't know. But we're sort of going with your typical run-of-the-mill Shadow Rider. I mean, there's a lot of different options. You could Scarf this thing if you wanted to, which is also a good option. And if you're Scarfing it, then, you know, Grass Knot is probably your next best option for dealing with Kyogre. We already have Xerneas to do that, but just adds one more option. So I suppose you can go with that if that's how you want to run your sweeper. You could even run Trick somewhere in there. Maybe Psyshock's too valuable to give up on. Maybe you go with something like this. I'm not too sure. But Shadow Rider, one way or another, great option. You can even go with Specs too, which is also a very dangerous thing to deal with. I realized that so far with what we've built up on, there's a very outstanding weakness to Fairy type Mons, especially since we're going with the Dragon type as our defogger. So we needed something to be able to deal with the Fairy types, particularly Zacian C and Xerneas. So I went with Necrozma Duskmane. I mean, we're going with the physically defensive variant, which doesn't really deal with Xerneas as well, but it's at least something. I don't know. I went with physically defensive, sort of typical standard. I opted to go with Sunsteel Strike over Earthquake, again, to kill fairies, but everything else is quite standard. Stealth Rocks, Morning Sun, and then T-Wave. Again, T-Wave is definitely something that Giratina Origin Form in this set, it appreciates a lot, so great synergy there. If Giratina's threatened by something that it can't set up its own T-Wave on, then perhaps Necrozma can. I also forgot to mention earlier, you could always run some specially defensive effort values as well if that's something you want to do. It's a free country after all. When it came to picking my 6th member, at first I was looking at the idea of going with a specially defensive Ferrothorn to more reliably deal with Xerneas, really just in any form. But when I made a specially defensive Ferrothorn and I sort of looked at the team from an overview standpoint, I really quickly realized that Zygarde Dragon Dance absolutely obliterates this team, and it's going to cause a lot of huge problems. I mean, I'm not really too fully aware with what the Ubers meta sort of looks like, but it's something that quickly I realized as I was looking through the list of Mons. So I went, that's not good. What should we do? I ended up switching out Ferrothorn with Xerneas. I was also noticing that our team was quite passive for a balanced team. Definitely wavered more towards the defensive spectrum, and I wanted the team to be as balanced as possible. So by adding Xerneas, we're still able to deal with Kyogre just the same. We now have the ability to deal with Zygarde, with Geomancy Xern, and our team's a little more aggressive and has more sweeping potential as well. So I suppose this makes for a nice substitute. I mean, if our opponent also has a Geozern, then, I mean, that could still be a problem for our team, possibly. I'm not too sure. It's also one of the reasons why I had Substitute on. If you're running into Yveltal, Substitute definitely helps you to win the mind games against Yveltal. Yveltal's a decent check, but it's definitely by no means a hard counter. So as long as you play the mind games right, I feel like Substitute can get you better results. We don't really have anything great to deal with when it comes to Xern, which I mean, that could cause problems. I'm not sure if there's other problems that this team has that I'm not really recognizing. Again, I'm not too familiar, and I'm quite new to Ubers. Perhaps there's some certain forms of Arceus that could cause us problems. I'm not so sure. But this is just sort of what I came up with as far as figuring out a way to deal with working with Sword and Shield's slightly more shallow move pool for pretty much every Mon. A lot of Mons lost a lot of access to things like your typical utility moves, Toxic, Defog. So this is just sort of what I came up to work around that if you are interested in making a Sun and... or, I'm sorry, I keep saying Sun. A Sword and Shield in-game team. Let me know what you guys think. Leave a comment down below if you have any feedback on how you think this team could be better, working within the parameters of Sword and Shield's in-game movesets. Also, let me know what you think of this video idea, if you like it or not, if you would like to see more of it. And I hope you all have a great day.